Bitcoin could win as a store of value and lose as medium of exchange. Bitcoin could win in the global south and lose in the west. Bitcoin could win as a store of value but lose as a remittance payment service to stablecoins. Is there a chance we could lose? Yes. Is there a chance that CBDCs could win? Apparently 60% almost of Bitcoiners think that Bitcoin's success is inevitable. We may have a superior protocol. We do have a superior protocol. That's clear. But that doesn't mean we're going to win. Models can either be proven right or wrong by there is this thing which happens to all technologies, that you get to your early adopters, but you get this problem. These are the ways that we're going to get mass adoption.
Today, we are joined by Daniel Batten, a climate tech investor. Daniel has become the leading voice in proving that Bitcoin is not bad for the environment, but is actually a vital tool for mitigating all that is wrong in the world, in the environmental space, methane mitigation, most specifically grid stability, for years, and using empirical evidence to combat this FUD. Whether he's coaching the next generation of Bitcoin leaders or cleaning up landfills, Daniel is here to show us why Bitcoin is the ultimate lifeline for both our planet and our individual freedom. Daniel, welcome to the show. Honored to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So we were just talking offline briefly about just mindset. And so we're going to go through many things. We'll hit some current events. We're going to talk about, what you're doing in the methane, cleaning up the environment with Bitcoin mining, leading Bitcoin CEOs and coaching people, et cetera. But we're talking about mindset and what keeps people back in life. And before we even hit any of those things, I actually want to go one step further with this, which is, have we lost the narrative over the last couple of years? We used to see a lot of great Bitcoin works, people, the exposés, the reports, the articles, books, and there's still books coming out, but a lot the ETFs and a lot of what's going on in Wall Street. Does it feel like to you the last couple of years we've lost that edge a little bit as Bitcoiners?
I think it's just changed focus, and this happens with every technology. I'm old enough to remember when this happened with the internet. I was using Usenet groups back in 1993, and then we saw the World Wide Web coming, and we saw the commercialization of the web. And that split the community, and some people said that's terrible, it's lost its roots, and other people said, well, it's just the maturation of any technology. It's like keep true your original tribe and only have it for that tribe, or mass adoption, choose one. But you can't have mass adoption of the whole world of people like you, because the whole world isn't like you. And so the early adopters of any technology are by definition the early adopters, and they are the minority. And so the cypherpunks are different from the early adopters, right? Even between the innovators and the early adopters, there's a difference. I'm not one of the original cypherpunks. I wasn't back there messing with the source code. I came in earlier, but not super early. And then the early majority is completely different to people like me who are prepared to get in, do our own research, tinker with the technology when some of the UX issues haven't quite been fully resolved. It's not completely usable. It's not completely apparent how to use it, because no one's out there with the business of educating you in the media, certainly. In fact, probably you could say the business of the opposite of educating you. And so, different messages are needed to take to different stakeholder communities. And that's just a rite of passage of any technology. So am I dismayed that Wall Street and institutional adopters are coming into Bitcoin? No, I think it's fantastic and necessary, because everything impacts everything. Do I care mostly about that? And is that where I spend most of my attention? No, it's not. What I report on much more is people like Eric Hirschman in Africa, helping to bring power to 28,000 rural villages who wouldn't have had power if he hadn't done a microhydro project using Bitcoin mining to monetize the underutilized hydro energy. But everything impacts everything. If we don't have institutional adoption, then in the next halving cycle, those projects won't be viable, and he won't be able to scale. So what happens in Wall Street, what happens in hedge funds, what happens in pension funds, what happens at nation-state adoption level and sovereign wealth funds impacts what happens in Africa. The world is completely connected. So in terms of mindset, where this comes to play, I'll just share something that came through quite recently. What mindset do we have when it comes to being optimistic of Bitcoin? It's like, Bitcoin's inevitable, right? That seems like a great positive mindset, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Well, actually, think of it this way. If your favorite sporting team was about to compete in the World Cup, would you want that sporting team going in there believing that it was impossible that they won? Would you want them believing that it was inevitable that they won? Or would you want them believing that it's possible, but the results were determined by their actions? You choose the last one every single time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to Bitcoin, I just did a survey, and apparently 60% almost of Bitcoiners think that Bitcoin success is inevitable. Now, that's my follower base, so that may be biased. But if anything, I tend to write quite a lot about how it's up to our actions. So if anything, it's probably biased in the opposite direction. So that's a lot of people who think that Bitcoin success is inevitable. And that's a dangerous mindset to have. And because it risks complacency, it risks that we underestimate the headwinds, competing technologies, that we poo-poo them too easily, that we dismiss people who don't adopt, and that we think we've got a right to occupy first place in the podium by virtue of our superior technology, which is akin to an athlete thinking they have a right to win a World Cup because they have superior sporting talents. Yeah, we may have a superior protocol. We do have a superior protocol. That's clear. But that doesn't mean we're going to win. That means that we're in the hunt, and it's now up to our efforts. And that's a mindset shift. But that mindset shift has a very strong repercussion for how we behave and Bitcoin's chances for mass adoption.
I love that you said the inevitable part, because that was my next question. And that's one of the things I can't stand the most in Bitcoin is people saying Bitcoin's inevitable. And
I understand where it comes from, because it comes from optimism. And so it comes from a good place. And you want to believe in the mission that you're part of, and you want to believe that it's going to happen. And so that's positive. We want to maintain that optimism. We want to, and we also need to reintroduce agency, that sense of it's absolutely possible, even it's likely, but it's up to us to make it happen. It's not going to happen without us. This is not just a technology sitting out there waiting to happen. Bitcoin is strong because it's a peer-to-peer network. And that's not just a technological network, that's a network of people. We're all a node in that network. And if those nodes are not active, right? If those nodes are not conveying messages to the next node who could be using Bitcoin, then, that's going to lead to a different outcome than if we have very active nodes in that network who are all taking responsibility and seeing that we're part of this decentralized network that collectively can do something amazing, but it's up to us.
Yeah, and honestly, this is, again, why I was so excited to speak with you, because I think this is the talk that very few people are having in Bitcoin right now. In saying all that, I'm going to try to wind this all together. There's a saying in Bitcoin of, rules, not rulers. It's a decentralized system, obviously, but we don't really need leaders. But do we need leaders? Is there a world where you think that we're going to a place where, Saylor, for example, we just brought him up. He obviously has a lot of Bitcoin. What he says carries more weight than other people. Everyone runs a node. Everyone's got to vote. You're the one person I feel like that has a grasp on this. And you've been going down this rabbit hole of teaching people and just the mindset shifts that we need to have. So where do you think this kind of goes in playing out in the coming years when it's, hey, everyone's looking around and like you said, the early adopters are like, hey, we're here, we're good, it's inevitable. And then you're looking around and no one's behind you. So what happens, Daniel?
So I would nuance it a little bit and say we don't want the sort of leadership that a lot of us have experienced that led to the creation of Bitcoin. So that sort of leadership we can do without when it's highly centralized, highly autocratic, where there is no autonomy given to the people who are being led. So that we can do without. However, to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that means we should have no leaders is naive. Of course we need leaders, but we need leadership which is based on service. And Satoshi, even though Satoshi is anonymous and it's a decentralized protocol, he had no position. He was the leader. He was the founder, right? He or she or they. And if we think back to the genesis of Bitcoin, it had three principles that we know for certain. We know very little about Satoshi, but we can infer three things. Number one, that Satoshi did not care about wealth, hasn't touched the wallet. So that's a pretty good indication that that was not the driver. Okay, that's good. Number two, didn't care about status because Satoshi did not create a foundation with Satoshi as a CEO. Okay, so that's good. Number three, did not care about fame because Satoshi is pseudonymous, right? Pseudonymous. So those are three really positive leadership attributes. And that's the sort of leadership you want, where it's taking leadership because he saw that there was a need to create something. If he'd said, okay, we don't need leaders, he wouldn't have taken any action. But that's not what happened. He saw the global financial crisis. He saw the need for a technology. He saw that he had the skills, the abilities, the wherewithal, the connections, the talents, the unique chance in history to put together a whole lot of technologies that have been evolving over 50 years and do something. And thank goodness that happened, because if that action didn't occur, we wouldn't have Bitcoin. So that was an act of radical leadership, but it was leadership from the principle of service, not from the principle of wanting power over someone else. Completely different impulse. So that's the sort of leadership that is consistent with Bitcoin's values, and we absolutely need more of. And it will be decentralized leadership, because there's not one leader, there's not one CEO, and thank goodness for that. And there's many, many different stakeholder communities of Bitcoin that are yet to be onboarded onto Bitcoin, right? And so each person will have a different audience that will only listen to them. So Michael Saylor is, you couldn't hope for a better person for onboarding other visionaries, for getting those early adopters in at the institutional level. You couldn't hope for a better evangelist than Michael Saylor. And there's still other people that Saylor can onboard. And it's also very clear that there's a whole lot of people who will resonate with a different message. And that's patient capital, that's pension funds, that's sovereign funds, who would not care so much for visionary leadership language ungrounded with what a seeming fiscal conservatism behind it, and are really looking for people to sit down, be humble, work through a process with them, go through the myriad of different procedural concerns they may have, the social proof issues they may have, the perception issues they may have in adopting Bitcoin, and work through them and speak to them in their language about how it's important. And that's a different skill set. And so that's where the future leadership opportunities emerge with those people. And they're not necessarily our evangelists, and they're not necessarily our high-profile influencers. These are people who are working behind the scenes tirelessly already with these communities, doing exactly that sort of work, sometimes without us even knowing. People like Sam Roberts, who onboarded UK's first pension fund, which was also the first ever pension fund that adopted Bitcoin in a way which was self-custodied. And it was also the world's first pension fund that allocated more than 1%. They allocated 3%. So 3 phenomenal firsts. Mostly no one's heard of him. Now, and that's the whole point. You don't have to have heard of these people. You don't need a big profile. But why was he successful? He was successful because he was talking to people who he understood. He understood the language of pension funds. He understood the processes they needed to go through. He's patient. He's humble. He sat down with them. He repositioned Bitcoin in their language. He didn't talk about how it's sucking the monetary premium out of other assets. He didn't talk about digital credit or digital capital. He understood the messages that were relevant to them, and he gave them just what they needed to know about Bitcoin. And that's where the leadership opportunities exist, because if we're going to cross the chasm between our early adopters and the early majority, those people are pragmatists. They don't care about the same things that onboarded us to Bitcoin at all. And so people who may themselves have come to Bitcoin for a different reason than the next cohort of people that they're talking to, and understand that nuance and that difference, they're vitally important. And it's a different personality type too. It's not an extrovert, it's an ambivert. These are people who know when to speak up and challenge people's perceptions, but they also know when to shut up and listen. And it's a very different person, but that's who we need a whole lot more of. And that's what I've been behind the scenes looking to cultivate and bring communities of people like that together within all these different niches, and say, hey, there's a whole lot of us together doing some really phenomenal work, most of it unheralded. That's not the reason you're doing it. That's not what they care about. Incredibly impactful, but sometimes feeling quite lonely because it doesn't feel like they have a cohort of other people who they know, who they can communicate with. So a guy like Ismail, for example, who has, again, unheralded, unknown within Bitcoin for the most part, should be on every podcast, because what he's done is phenomenal. He has been in the charitable industry for a number of years. He's had 2 successful exits. He's raised over $200 million for charities previously. Now he's come and created a Bitcoin startup, and he's, with his team, has onboarded 50,000 people who are now giving to charity using Bitcoin as the denomination. And these were not Bitcoiners previously. He's also single-handedly got Make-A-Wish Foundation, Save the Children, and Amnesty International, together with others, onboarded to Bitcoin. These are people who are very opposed to Bitcoin previously because of ESG reasons. So that's a phenomenal achievement. And how did he do that? Not because he led with Bitcoin, not because he talked about the future of sound money, not because he talked about currency debasement, none of those things. Because he solved a pain for the charitable sector and he solved a pain for donors. And what is that pain? Donors get tired of giving and charities get tired of asking year after year after year. And he said, well, hang on a minute. We have a solution to that. What if we create a product like a stretch product, which gives a yield such that you can have a principal, and then essentially the interest, so to speak, goes to your charity every single year. And the message he had, and he took about 3 months to land at this message because he really understood the importance of getting the message right to onboard new people, was what if your gift to charity didn't die? What if your gift to charity was infinite? And then what's happened is people are now using Bitcoin. Most of the time, they don't even know they're using Bitcoin. And then they find out, and you know what they say? You know what they say? They don't say, oh, it's Bitcoin, I'm going to stop using it. They say things like, I had no idea that Bitcoin was such a noble asset. So these are the ways that we're going to achieve mass adoption. It's no one thing. It's a sequence of leaders in their different communities who have different expertise. Maybe it's a firefighter. Maybe it's a school teacher. Maybe it's someone who knows how to set up India's first hedge fund. And one of the people in my coaching fund, that's exactly what they did, on my coaching group, rather. So, but everyone has this different community of people, and the people who know how to nuance that message to that community will all play a part in the mass adoption of Bitcoin. It's not going to be any one thing.
Such incredible stories. And so we've been kind of circling what you're doing. So I'd love for you to talk more specifically who it is you are helping and in crossing this chasm, because it really does feel like we're in this, and you nailed it. And it's something I've been thinking about for a while, this idealism, visionary world, early adopter, and crossing the chasm to the more pragmatic, bigger chunk of society. And we're in this weird phase, this transition phase. And it feels like, and we talked about mindset off before we started, of people, it seems like people don't even feel like they're worthy of having Bitcoin, having freedom, which is wealth, which is your time and energy and freedom. Like, I'm not even worthy to have that because we've been brainwashed for so long. So I would love for you to kind of expound on this a little bit more, and this idea and who you are helping right now.
Well, there's two things that are really important for Bitcoin mass adoption. One is the technology layer, the UX layer. If you look at what happened with the internet, we had an amazing TCP IP layer. We had HTTP. We had the protocol layer sorted and robust. Does that sound familiar? But what did we not have? We didn't have the UX on top. We didn't have the application layer sorted for a long time. And that's why people like me were happy to use Usenet groups on clunky user interfaces and dial-up modem. But most of society wasn't. They wanted to wait until they had Netflix and YouTube and decent browser experience and all the rest of it. So Bitcoin has not yet had its World Wide Web moment. That'll come, absolutely, with certainty. So that's part of it. And equally important is getting the message right. And if you look at the book I'm referencing here is Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore, he talks about this very clearly. And that's in the field that I work in, which is technology adoption. I had my own technology company, started, grew it, exited that, then invested in other technology companies and helped them through that growth curve, coached over 60 founders. So I got to see a lot of, so this is not, it's opinion, but it's a reasonably informed opinion about how technology adoption curves happen. And in the technology community, it's widely accepted that there is this thing called crossing the chasm, which happens to all technologies, that you get to your early adopters, but you get this problem, which is that your early adopters and every technology, not just Bitcoin, struggle to onboard the early majority for the exact same reason. That the reasons that brought them to the technology are not the reasons that will bring the next cohort to the technology. So it's a recognized issue, and Bitcoin is facing the same challenge. If you look at, yes, it's adopting fast in many parts of the world, and that's fantastic. And at the same time, we have to acknowledge, and we know this through Troy Cross's great work with the Nakamoto project, that in the US last year, adoption stalled. 48 million, tremendous, in 2024, 48 million in 2025. And also there was a slight entrenchment of Bitcoin because of media portrayals that it was more neuroassociated with right-wing politics. So these are things we just have to be mindful of. And again, once a technology gets politicized, it's hard to get mass adoption. It's hard to get mass adoption of any movement. Look at the climate movement. Look at how that really struggled to get mass acceptance in the US as soon as it became neuro-associated with Al Gore and the Democrats. He thought he was doing something amazing, and perhaps on some levels it did, but it also had a side effect, which was the polarization that occurred. So I asked myself the question at the start of this year. Obviously, as you know, I've done a whole lot of FUD fighting over a long time. I don't see myself as a FUD fighter, and I don't kind of exactly know how that ever happened. Other than it was the same moment. It was like, okay, I guess I know something about this. I'm a climate tech investor. I'm not a Bitcoin maxi, or I certainly wasn't at the time. But I just wanted to do some research and did some research, published the results, and lo and behold, it was interesting and needed by a lot of Bitcoiners at the time. And so I was happy to just continue good objective research, because I could see that what was being printed was lacking in objectivity and was lacking in good sound data. But I never saw myself as that's what I'm going to keep on doing. That was always just like, okay, let's get on the field and take this opportunity. Let's take that responsibility. But my real superpower is coaching. So I wanted to get back to doing that again, because that's what I did for the 15 years prior. And so at the start of the year, I really said, well, how can I make the biggest contribution to Bitcoin adoption? And it was very clear to me that it was to do more of what I was already doing. That I spent pretty much most of last year counteracting environmental FUD. And that did have an impact. We have the data on that the media FUD has reduced as a result. At the same time, it's also increased when it comes to FUD on crime, on Bitcoin being a Ponzi scheme, on what else? A bubble, on being a tool of the right wing. So again, FUD has increased in these other areas, and it's like playing whack-a-mole. It's like you bring down FUD here and it goes up here. Yeah. So it's too big there's too much of it for one person to do. And even if we eliminate all FUD, you can't win just because you've eliminated FUD. That's like thinking you're going to win on the sports field because you've got a good defense. You've still got to do some offensive stuff. You've got to get there and get your positive message. You can't just counteract the negative message. So even that, it's like way too much for one person. It's too much for 50 people. But it may be achievable by a few hundred people who really are moving and shaking. And so I just said, well, look, if there's people who are already doing incredible work, I know the importance that mindset makes. I know the importance that leadership makes. You can get a 10x improvement in your results if you just tweak a few things related to your blind spots. Why not use the superpower I have as a coach to help people to do just that? So that's been a whole lot of fun. And it's not only about the coaching, but it's also about being a catalyst for a group of Bitcoiners to come together and counteract that feeling of loneliness you have. What's the tribe we have? We're not a company, so there's no water cooler, right? There's no coffee machine. There's no pub we go to. So what's our pub? It's Twitter. And okay, that's a good gathering ground in some cases, absolutely. If it wasn't for Twitter, I would never have been invited to conferences and podcasts or anything. So it's fantastic in some ways. But I think we'd all agree that it's less than fantastic in others. It's not a great place to get objective data from. It's not a great place to get a constant feed of inspiration from, to counteract your doubts from, to get clear signal from. And so where do we get that? Where do we get that solidarity? Where do we get that assistance from someone else, one of our fellow honey badgers, when it's all feeling a bit too overwhelming because we're pioneering constantly and we don't know where we're going? Where do we get that sense of camaraderie? Or where does someone challenge our blind spot? Well, we get that through forming an intentional peer group. And so I thought, well, let's do that. I know that works anyway. I've done that with technology entrepreneurs for a number of years. Let's do that for Bitcoiners and just see what magic happens. And it's been great. I've started these groups and I'm looking to do much more because it seems to be working and people seem to be enjoying it and doing cool things. Again, not because of me, but because of each other, because of everyone, because of what they learn from each other, because of their commitment to themselves and their commitment to overcome their own blind spots and their commitments to help see and guide the other people in the group through their blind spots too. So it's really been a beautiful and wonderful experience, and I'm planning to do a lot more of it.
All right, real talk for a second. We all know health insurance is basically the fiat system of healthcare. The biggest debauchery there is. It's expensive, confusing. Somehow you still end up paying hundreds of dollars for a Band-Aid. We moved to crowd sharing almost 5 years ago. It's the best decision we ever made. Instead of sending your money to the insurance company's black hole, you join a like-minded community that directly funds each other's medical bills. Simple, transparent, way cheaper, and that difference you save, you can invest in Bitcoin. It's an amazing win-win. And look, we're part of the Bitcoin community because we believe in freedom, decentralization. Crowd Health brings that same mindset to healthcare. You choose your doctor, you pay in cash, and the community's got your back when the big bills hit. No networks, no middlemen, no bureaucrats trying to approve your care, just people helping people the way it should be. You make decisions about your health. That's as sovereign as it gets. So if you're ready to take the orange pill for your health, this open enrollment, go to Join Crowd Health to get started for $99 for your first 3 months using code Brandon at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com, code Brandon. Crowd Health is not insurance. Opt out. Take your power back. This is how we win. Generational wealth doesn't happen by accident. Bitcoin fixed the money, but it didn't fix the system of protecting and passing it on. Bitcoiners, we have to live in two different worlds, idealism versus pragmatism. That's where Meanwhile comes in. It's the world's first Bitcoin-denominated life insurance company, regulated in Bermuda and built entirely by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. With Meanwhile, long-term holders can grow and protect their Bitcoin wealth through tax-free policy loans, no repayment obligation, no margin call risk, while making inheritance simple and secure and entirely in Bitcoin. It's about sovereignty, stewardship, and building a legacy that lasts centuries. Because if Bitcoin is forever, your plan should be too. Learn more and sign up with code 4QPBWC at meanwhile.bm. That's meanwhile.bm, code 4QPBWC, or just sign up in the link in the description below.
Who can get involved in it? Is it just for people building Bitcoin businesses? You know, like what's the scope of it?
Not just businesses. So some of them are absolutely people like Ismail or people like Batten, who started the hedge fund in India, or people who've started their own hedge fund with investors in the US even. But other people they may be, for example, people like Tim, who he's a school teacher, who started the Illinois Bitcoin Council in the school holidays, right? Incredible. Or people like Chris, who have started the Bitcoin Stewardship Initiative, which is using Bitcoin as a way to enhance and promote and scale regenerative agriculture. Incredible project. So, or it may be someone like Bastian, who set up the Bitcoin Policy Institute in France. It may be someone who's like Sam, who's spoke to New Zealand's Prime Minister and helped to include Bitcoin mining as part of the energy conversation for the country. Or it may be people that I can't even mention because it's kind of confidential, who are speaking right now about how a certain nation can acquire Bitcoin in a tax-neutral way. So there can be people who are moving and shaking in the political sphere, in the regulatory sphere, in the business sphere. It doesn't really matter. But the common denominator is that they have a community of people where they have some influence. They want to increase that influence. And they recognize that a small few tweaks can have a pronounced difference, whether that's tweaks to message, tweaks to strategy, tweaks to the way they're delivering, tweaks to the networks that they're connected with, because that's the other thing that happens in the groups is you get the combined nodal effect of the network of everyone in that group and the ability to connect there. And that just helps to accelerate what people are doing in their own little part of Bitcoin.
So amazing. We're going to, in a few minutes, we're going to dive into some of the climate aspects. I have a couple of questions there, obviously what you're doing, but also just some general questions, which I think are, again, just get totally blown over. But yeah, it's funny because like you were saying, like there's the quantum FUD, there's all these different FUD that has come up in the last year or two, call it. But for 15 years, it was Bitcoin's boiling the oceans, and which is the FUD that you have generally, for the most part, been combating. And now all of a sudden, it just feels like that is gone largely. Where either you beat it into submission, or it was all of a sudden AI needs all this energy, so energy usage good. So it feels like there's just all of a sudden there's just this big switch all of a sudden. So it's very interesting in that world. But what do you see with Bitcoin businesses going forward? Like again, we're talking about this chasm a lot and helping people make this transition, and what you're doing with your business. To me, it feels like we're in this weird epoch where as Bitcoiners gain wealth and gain purchasing power and the value of the network grows, we're going to have an explosion, it feels like, of venture capital basically inside the Bitcoin ecosystem, where Bitcoiners themselves have enough wealth. there's enough Bitcoiners with enough wealth that are all of a sudden investing, starting businesses, pouring their Bitcoin, their wealth back into the system to build out. Do you see that as well? Because it feels like we're in that chasm as well. For you kind of look around and like, I feel like there should be more Bitcoin businesses even, but maybe that's coming in the next 4 years or the next 5 years. Does it seem like that to you?
Yeah, well, two things. Firstly, I got to say that it wasn't only me counteracting this. Yes, I might have been more visible, but there was a whole lot of people behind the scenes who really contributed. And a lot of my work was really collating the work that other people were doing and putting the messaging wrapper around it. So that could be in a digestible form rather than asking people to read peer-reviewed studies. And the second thing is we know categorically that it wasn't just AI needs energy, so suddenly energy good, because the narrative started to shift prior to that. And we can pinpoint, and of course I'm a data guy, I look at these questions. I say, was it that? Because I want to know myself. And I go in there saying, okay, that's a possible interpretation. What does the data tell us? But what the data tells us is that we can pinpoint specific actions that people took within Bitcoin, not only me, a lot of people, who which had a pronounced impact, such as when Troy Cross, for example, had a conversation with Ben von Wong, who was the artist who created the skull of Satoshi, and suddenly he softened his position and wasn't hard anti-Bitcoin anymore and published that. And we know that had a big impact on the Greenpeace campaign, such as when Troy and Trey and I and Margot all had a talk to the director of Greenpeace USA's anti-Bitcoin campaign, and he left the campaign.
Wow.
I can't talk too much about the circumstances, but we know that the actions we took, because we were ourselves environmentalists talking to other environmentalists, meant that it wasn't possible for them to maintain the illusion that it was Bitcoin anti-environment, Greenpeace pro-environment fight. It's like, no, these are environmentalists fighting each other. Maybe one group of environmentalists knows something that the other group doesn't. So we created doubt in their minds. And I labor that point because it's very important that we get the interpretation right when it comes to what actually worked, and it was our proof of work. Now, why is that important? It's important because we need to believe that we have the power to do that again. What we demonstrated was not a one-time trick. We showed that a group of people can come together and we can shift an entire narrative on Bitcoin, which had been pervasive. In fact, it was the most pervasive attack vector. So if we can do it once, we can do it again. We can shift other narratives. And that doesn't just extend to fighting FUD, that extends to telling the positive story about Bitcoin. If we could get together as a group of volunteers and do that, we can do that with anything. We can onboard any community. We have the power to do it. We have the tools, but it requires coordination, it requires sophistication, it requires adapting the message to the audience and audience awareness. It doesn't just happen because Bitcoin is wonderful by itself. So coming to the question about Bitcoin businesses, same things are important. It's like we need truly great products. We need people who are aware, audience aware not of what I want as an early technology enthusiast who's prepared to use something a little bit clunky that doesn't quite work, but I'll figure it out. But what a pragmatist wants, what they need, what's their equivalent of Netflix and YouTube and browsers that work, right? What's the killer apps going to be for them? So we need really smart technology entrepreneurs who can move into those areas, who have the smarts, and even if they don't, they can vibe code it, who knows, but who can just create those products. And not only business products, but like look what Jack's done when creating a technology, vibe coding something into existence that could be transmitted by Bluetooth, and now it's been used in Iran as a freedom technology. So we need more of that. We absolutely need more of that, but not just more, but more of the right technologies. I think BitAxes are wonderful. I think they're absolutely wonderful. And I know that it's not yet appealing to a pragmatist, right? So there'll be like a makeover that's required to create the version of a BitAxe, which is a miner, which sits there, which is creating sats. But that's a wonderful product, has incredible potential. A lot of people, including me, are starting to believe that if you want to onboard people to Bitcoin, introducing them to Bitcoin mining, whether it's heating their homes or just a little lottery there or sitting on their desk, is a really good possibility. But it's not going to be the only thing. There's going to be other things too. So we need people who can see those and have those insights. No one has a monopoly on good ideas, but who can then test them out and be rigorous about it's not just a good idea. That's the fallacy you learn pretty soon on when you're a tech entrepreneur. Idea is about 1% of it. The other 99% is the execution of the idea. So people who are really good at executing that idea. And that requires a lot of feedback and iteration. constantly, and it beats down your ego too, because you get told that. I remember the first time we unveiled our technology product. It was a bioinformatics product, and the first time I showed it to a molecular biologist, I said, "What do you think?" And he was like, "Yeah, I can see maybe in a year it'd be useful if you did another year of development on it." And I'm like, "That's not what you're supposed to say. You're supposed to say it's wonderful. Can I introduce it to my whole department?" It was devastating to the ego, but you need to be prepared for your ego to take a beating and to listen to your user community, and they'll tell you what they want. Yes, have a vision like Steve Jobs about the thing they don't even know to ask for, but then once you have that vision, listen deeply to the refinements you can make, so you're getting the right blend of revolution and evolution to your product. And then, of course, as we're saying, the technology layer is not enough by itself. How do you connect that? How do you message that to your user community? As I said, Ismail spent 3 months. He understood that message development was as important as product development. And they'd make tweaks and they'd look and they'd change a single word here and there in their message, and they'd see the user adoption going up or going down relative to the change and tweak to the message. So having that same discipline there. And then sometimes that message is to an investor, sometimes it's to a board member, sometimes it's to a rock star developer you want to join your company rather than get paid 3 times as much from Google. But sometimes it's just pitching to yourself why you could keep going, or pitching to your partner to let you keep going, that you're not going to run out of money and the children aren't going to starve. So these skills, the combination of the technology skills and those skills to communicate the value of what you're doing, that's what's going to create more Bitcoin companies. And I foresee there's going to be a lot more of them. And then, like any technology, it'll consolidate, and you'll see some clear winners start to emerge, some clear standards start to emerge that solve some of these, fundamental issues, such as, how do I live on a Bitcoin standard, right? I don't know what the answer is. Everyone has, well, not everyone, but a lot of people have different interpretations of the answer, but that will emerge, and we'll see a standard start to emerge. So you can do everything on a Bitcoin standard. We're a long way from that, but that's the future. There's no question about that.
So, there's a fair amount of people. We have very advanced people that watch the show, and there's people that are just really learning Bitcoin. And so I guess my question might be, for some of the people watching, would say, wow, Daniel, you sound very confident. Because many people still, again, we talked about Bitcoin being inevitable. There's a lot of people that think, hey, Bitcoin is going to be usurped by the next, Facebook and MySpace argument and all these things. Like, okay, you guys are just building this world. What if it doesn't exist in 5 years? What are you building actually? So what do you say when someone's kind of coming with that thought, I guess, or just how are you so confident that you're just building this thing that's going to exist in 10 years?
Yeah, well, I'm confident, but I'm not overconfident. That's right. Because if I was too confident, I'd think it was inevitable, and that would be not the right mindset. So I'm confident that we're going to build this layer, and it'll be much more usable. But it's up to us how good it is and the extent to which it rolls out throughout every different part of the world, because people use Bitcoin in different ways. So it's not just, does Bitcoin win or does it lose? It's much more nuanced than that. Bitcoin could win as a store of value and lose as medium of exchange. Bitcoin could win in the global south and lose in the west. Bitcoin could win as a store of value but lose as a remittance payment service to stablecoins. So there's all sorts of different ways that, like frontiers, where Bitcoin can either win, lose, or kind of be in the middle. And so, yes, I'm very confident we're going to sort out this problem. People will be able to live on a Bitcoin standard, but the extent to which that rolls out with different user communities and different geographies is up to us. So that's the mindset that I have. So I think the doubters are good, and we need the doubters. They're important. We shouldn't say, how dare you, what heresy. It's important to listen to them and then to discern, what are the genuine doubts that we should have ourselves, and what are the doubts that are anchored in a lack of understanding or misinformation. Because there are 3 types, right? Misunderstanding, misinformation, or a genuine doubt, which we should take on. And I think it's good to have doubts. Say, I don't know. There are some things I don't know about the extent to which Bitcoin will succeed. Is there a chance we could lose? Yes. Is there a chance that CBDCs could win? You have to believe that, because if you don't believe that, if you think it's Bitcoin will win come what may, then what are you going to do to contribute to making sure that is the case?
Okay, so I feel like this is a really good segue to start talking about some of the stuff you guys are working on, the methane cleanup, etc. But the bridge to that, I believe, or what I'm thinking of, is the utility of Bitcoin mining itself. So like obviously gold and silver are having their heyday this last year or so. It's in the news, I guess, at least on Twitter, people are talking about it. And so everyone's going back and forth. And gold and silver, obviously the utility of it, people talk about utility all the time. Money has to have utility, et cetera, et cetera. It's got to be used in other things. And where do you see, like, what drives the value of Bitcoin in your mind? I mean, you're entrenched in the Bitcoin mining space and what's happening and how it's cleaning up the environment. So what to you, I guess, provides the value to, where's the utility of Bitcoin versus like the monetary premium? Does it have that? People, I don't think talk about this very much, but there is that aspect of like, hey, we're cleaning up the earth, things we couldn't do before without Bitcoin, and now we're doing it. So where do you see, when you kind of zoom out, do you see this conversation becoming a thing with Bitcoin where there's a monetary premium and then there's this utility value of Bitcoin, kind of going back to this whole talk of like, does Bitcoin succeed? Where does it succeed? Et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. So value is multidimensional. So one level, you have the economic value. It has value because the market says it has value. Mm-hmm. And another level, it has value because it has utility. And then if you look at the utility, Bitcoin has utility, unquestionably. Yeah. It's impossible to be educated about who's using Bitcoin how and not come to the conclusion that Bitcoin has immense utility, and not just at a small scale, but at a very large scale. And this is true in the global south, but it's also true in the West. It has utility for me. I have a newsletter and I am able to pay someone in Kenya to co-write my newsletter because I can pay him in Bitcoin. He doesn't want to be paid in stable coins. He certainly doesn't want to be paid in the Kenyan shilling because I'd have to wire transfers over him. He would have to spend 2 hours getting to a bank, and then there'd be like a significant wire transfer fee and someone clipping the ticket in the middle. It wouldn't work to the point I wouldn't have recruited him because there would have been too much friction. So it works for me because I'm able to take on the best person to do that job because we can exchange value in Bitcoin. And I asked him, well, you could use stable coins personally, couldn't you? He said, I don't want to use stable coins. He said, look, he's been doing this for 2 years. He said, every single transaction that you make in Bitcoin stays in Bitcoin. He smiled, right? Because for him, that represents a chance of him leaving his fiat job in the future. So that has immense utility for him, but it also has immense utility for me because I'm able to have this international relationship with someone in a country which doesn't have quite such great banking rails. And he's just honestly the best person I could possibly have to co-write that newsletter. So yes, Bitcoin has utility in the West. It has utility in the global South. Now, clearly it has a lot more utility at the moment in the global South because there's a greater need. And that's true, and that's apparent because if you try explaining the value of Bitcoin to someone in the West, you know what happens, right? But if you try explaining the value to someone in South Africa, and I was having a conversation about this with Stafford recently, who runs the African Bitcoin treasury company there, and he said, look, if you're in a black township in South Africa, people get it like that. Because they know what it is to live with high inflation. They've seen the rand go down in value relative to the US dollar 8 times since the year 2000. He said, when you are living with high inflation, not even hyperinflation, that's just high inflation. I mean, we're not even talking about Argentina or Turkey or Venezuela. This is just high inflation. But that high inflation means you can't afford medical supplies. You can't afford food. You can't afford shelter. It means that you have an entire generation who loses hope. It means that you have depression. It means you have suicide. It means you have violent protests. In other words, people die because they don't get medical equipment. People die because they are in violent protests, and people die because they lose hope and they commit suicide. All because of what? Currency devaluation. And this is not me speculating from the outside. This is me talking to someone who's been in these townships, who knows these people, who's seen it firsthand. So how can we say Bitcoin doesn't have utility? All we're actually saying is I haven't looked out of my little bubble of privilege in the West. So we know it has utility. And these are just like 2 or 3 of the myriad of utilities that it has. The Digital Assets Research Institute did a whole study that showed that contrary to a lot of myths that it's only used by the rich and the middle class, actually it's used throughout society. It's used by the very, very poor as well. People who might have like a $6 feature phone and they're transacting Bitcoin in that to save what little they have. In refugee camps, refugees taking Bitcoin across borders. So they don't have access to gold. And even if they did, you know what would happen if they tried to cross borders with it. They can't take money out of an ATM. It's going to get stolen. It's going to be lost either in a refugee camp or somewhere else. But they do have access to Bitcoin, and they can take that across borders, and it is making an existential difference when they are repatriated in another country. So these are massive utilities that, for the most part, go unreported. And then we have Bitcoin's very unique because, and I really like to draw this distinction about just how unique Bitcoin mining is in the world. So Bitcoin is, let's use a commodity such as a shoe. Okay, Bitcoin's a commodity, not a security. So let's use an example of another commodity, a shoe. So a shoe has value because I want to put it on my foot and wear it so that I don't get sore knees when I play tennis. So that has utility, that has value. But what about the shop where the shoe is produced? Does that have value outside of producing shoes? I think we'd all agree, no, it doesn't have any value to society other than producing the commodity. So Bitcoin is a commodity, and Bitcoin mining is equivalent to that shoe shop. That's the means by which Bitcoin is created and brought into the system. Unlike any other commodity, asset, or technology, that has independent value to humanity. A Nike shoe shop can't balance the grid. It can't accelerate the green energy transition. It can't mitigate methane. A gold mining facility can't do anything good for the environment. In fact, it does a whole lot of bad for the environment. But a Bitcoin mining facility can help balance the grid, can soak up otherwise wasted renewable energy, can provide a demand-side solution for energy demand variability, which obviates the need for a supply-side solution in the form of a gas peaker plant. It can mitigate methane. It can use recycled heat to decarbonize industries which are heat-dependent, such as greenhouses, such as district heating, such as home heating, such as tropical fish farms, such as bathhouses, swimming pools, you name it. So these are incredible accidental applications of the means of producing the commodity, and that's unique to any industry. And so Bitcoin's utility is threefold. That's why I say it's multidimensional. It has value because the market determines that it has value. It has value because it has social utility, humanitarian utility, functional utility, so that I can engage and employ people. Otherwise, I couldn't. And then it has environmental utility through the process of producing that Bitcoin itself. So it is truly unique and remarkable. And again, I'm not saying that because I hold Bitcoin. In fact, it's the other way around. I hold Bitcoin because I'm saying it, because I've seen many technologies. I invest in many technologies. I've had 2 climate tech investment funds. I've seen over 200 different climate tech propositions, ranging from in a lab through to Series A, Series B. And I didn't get excited about any of them to the same extent I got excited about Bitcoin, because I understand technology adoption curves. I understand that when you first have a technology, its value is not always apparent, right? Like with the bicycle, the internet, the telegraph, the automobile, the radio. But when you research it, you start to see the internet. But when you research and look into it and start to use it, you start to see these applications. And you start to see, even though you can't predict the future, you can look and say, wow, I don't know exactly how this is going to pan out, but I can see the opportunity is absolutely massive. And it solves some real world issues. So it has multidimensional value.
2 follow-ups on this. The first one is this just like information asymmetry, and kind of what we've been talking about a little bit, just overall, of the information of this, the beauty of Bitcoin and the mining and what it does for the environment, for people all over, the utility of it. Is it just information is not evenly distributed, and that's why, you know, where it's not global adoption yet?
It's information asymmetry meets confirmation bias. So, or to put it more simply, what's different about Bitcoin is that if you didn't adopt the internet early, what did you lose? Not that much, really. Not that much. If you didn't adopt Bitcoin early, what did you lose? A lot of potential commercial, potential financial upside, right? So that's what's different about it. This is the first time we've had a technology where people who saw it early and bought and sold, like a certain New Scientist journalist, or people who saw it early and didn't buy it at all, but had the opportunity to see it and missed it. Now, there's a very well-known psychological phenomenon, which is that you will then tend to double down on why you were right to miss the opportunity, because the blow to the ego of admitting, oh, I saw it, I didn't take the opportunity, what an idiot. That's hard, and most people don't go there. So it's much easier to justify that decision rather than admit the pain that, oh, I saw it and I missed it. It's so much easier to justify, say, yeah, I missed it, but it's just a bubble. It'll come down. Or I missed it, but it's destroying the environment. I feel virtuous. Those other people, clearly they have no virtues. They're on board. So it's much easier to rationalize, and all humans have intellects. So we're very good at using the intellect to rationalize, but we can also use the intellect to internalize and to reflect. And not everyone takes the second path. So that's what we have to contend with. So it's not just information asymmetry. And that's why I say the message and the messenger are very important, because we need people who understand that a lot of people may feel salty. They may feel that regret. It may be their ego and their emotions, not their intellect and their mind, that are stopping them from embracing Bitcoin. So you can have all the most wonderful logical arguments in the world, and they can all miss the mark because people don't care about them. Okay, let's go to the next step. Let's find out about the person's values, and let's have all the most wonderful reasons in the world why Bitcoin is a good fit for their values. Well, that comes closer. That's a whole lot better, but it still could miss the mark because they still have some reason to want to justify that they were right not to invest earlier. So it requires skill. It requires nuance. This is a new challenge. I think it's a great challenge, and it's one of the reasons that I think Bitcoin has a slightly harder rite of passage than other nascent disruptive technologies. And the other reason that it has a harder rite of passage, again, doesn't mean impossible, but it is more challenging, is just the sheer number of people who stand to lose if Bitcoin wins, right? There's a lot. It's like banks, central banks, financial middlemen, a whole bunch of people.
All the way down to the people you just mentioned, like who didn't invest initially, right? Like all the way down to the average guy. Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible.
There's a whole lot of people who stand to lose a position of incumbency that they've enjoyed in a world where Bitcoin is the standard. So those people are not just going to usher in the new technology and say, our time has come. They are going to use the tools and levers at their disposal, which includes incredible influence in the media. And of course they're going to pull those levers. History tells us that's exactly what happens, and to expect otherwise is to be naive. So that's why I say to Bitcoiners, don't waste time getting too frustrated by that. That's a compliment that Bitcoin is taken seriously. It's not been ignored anymore. It's been fought. So we're at the final stage. Well, the second to last stage.
There's one thing more important than Bitcoin: the time you have and the people and relationships you build. In a world full of noise, the real signal is meeting with other Bitcoiners IRL, finding Bitcoin-only events, connecting face-to-face, and supporting the circular economy through Bitcoin-friendly merchants around the world. That's exactly what Club Orange is built for. Build your circle. Support Bitcoin-only companies. The only place in the world you can find all that in one spot is the Club Orange app on iOS or Android. Go to cluborange.org, what used to be the Orange Pill app, or scan the code here. Everything you are learning in this episode is completely moot and does not matter if you hold Bitcoin and are still leaving it on an exchange or sharing keys and your KYC information with a third party. This is your wake-up call now. You are only self-sovereign if you alone hold the keys to your wealth. 100% self-custody sounds daunting at first. Believe me, I lost 2 years of massive gains over a decade ago because I was worried about taking the few minutes it took to understand self-custody. And that's exactly why you need to talk to my friends, Tony Yazbek and his team at The Bitcoin Way. We just interviewed Tony recently, has over 80,000 views, an overwhelming response. People love his story and the simplicity he shares of how easy it is to custody and take ownership of the greatest money we've ever seen. They'll train you to do it right the first time. Head on over to thebitcoinway.com/Brandon to schedule a free 30-minute consultation today. Their 5-star rated service is exactly what you need. Quit sitting on your hands like I did and get started today. Again, that's thebitcoinway.com/BRANDON.
Okay, so you just mentioned like the technological adoption. I know there's the fight, the Bitcoin, one of the many Bitcoiner fights of power law versus the S-curve of adoption. And like those two, from what I've seen over the years, those two sides don't agree with each other. Right? Like the S-curve of technological adoption, they're like, no, it's power law and it's going to, whatever. So these guys are fighting all the time. It's above my pay grade. But what do you see? So you mentioned that technological curve. What do you see when you kind of look out and just look at kind of humanity, how things usually progress, and these emergent technologies?
So in terms of models, I don't get too much into models. I just look at what the data tells me, and whether that's a Bitcoin price chart or whether that's what's right in front of me. For me, those are like Moore's law. That's not a prediction of what's going to happen. That's a potential path of what could happen. So
Okay.
Moore's law was more like a challenge that was laid down to the engineers saying, hey, look what the last generation of engineers have done. Do you want to be the turkeys who stuff this up and who don't? Okay, or words to that effect, really.
Yeah.
And the engineers rose to the challenge and they continued to make Moore's law true. So I see these models in the same sense. It's like it's a challenge that's laid in our feet and said, yeah, see if you can make this model true. But it's not a predictor of the future. And if we see it again as a predictor of the future, hey, that's great. We know Bitcoin price is going to go up. What happens? We take no action and Bitcoin price doesn't go up because new user communities don't onboard it. So how I would like people to use them is say, okay, let's make that true. What's a community of people that I can onboard? And we know that it's like, if you analyze what's really helped to move the needle on Bitcoin price lately, what are the big events like since say 2021? What do you think are the big needle moving events that have moved Bitcoin price up, would you say?
So the thing I think about a lot is bank accounts getting frozen, obviously COVID, war happening, and people leaving with their seed phrase in their head or things like that. The printing of the currency, massive, jolts and that nature. So I feel like it's a couple different
things. They created the environment, but I'm talking about single events or single happenings or single like a change so for example, what happened after the election in 2024? What happened to price?
Yeah, went up.
If Donald Trump had not won the election, would that have happened to Bitcoin price?
No, not like that. Yeah.
No, wouldn't have. So let's go back a step. Why did Donald Trump embrace Bitcoin? Well, you could say that it was because he realized he could win over a voter community. But what led him to that realization? What led him to get comfortable with it? Well, it was conversations. It was conversations. There's a woman, Tracy, who knew the Trump family very well. She's one of the advisors to Capital B, as am I, who had conversations with the Trump family. And then there was David Bailey, who came in, he had a conversation with Donald Trump. So it was conversations that led to Donald Trump deciding to change radically his position on Bitcoin and the Trump family as well. Mm-hmm. As a result of that, then a lot of people who either would not have voted or may have voted Democrats changed their allegiance and voted for Donald Trump. And that, we know from the data, was enough to swing the election in key marginal states. So that those conversations had a big outcome. I mean, not just on Bitcoin price, but on the US political landscape. What was another thing that led Bitcoin price to going up? ETF adoption, right?
Yeah.
Well, again, why did Larry Fink change his mind on Bitcoin? He was against Bitcoin. Why did Fidelity change their mind on Bitcoin? It didn't just happen. It happened because they had conversations with key Bitcoiners behind the scenes who wished to remain anonymous. But there was just two of them, basically, who had conversations with the directors of Fidelity and with Larry Fink and the directors of BlackRock, and were able to talk to them again, not as proselytizing Bitcoin, but sitting down, being patient, hearing how they, as institutional investors with their own processes and objections and ESG mandates and all the rest of it, looked at the asset and all the barriers they had to adoption, and realizing that the story they needed to hear was not why Bitcoin was a great asset. They already knew Bitcoin was a great asset. That wasn't the challenge they had. That's the problem we often have. Oh, we go and talking about how wonderful Bitcoin. They already know Bitcoin's a wonderful asset, or they wouldn't be talking to us. That's not the issue. The issue is that there's a whole lot of reasons that they can't adopt it, that they need to be worked through patiently, and those people did that. And that led to Larry Fink changing his mind, Fidelity changing their mind, and today they're the biggest Bitcoin ETFs on the planet. Let's go back a step again. Let's look at Michael Saylor. We've been talking about him before. What led to him adopting Bitcoin? And what was the consequence of him adopting Bitcoin? Well, the consequence of him adopting Bitcoin and suddenly strategy buying a lot of Bitcoin shares and suddenly a lot of copycat behavior from other corporate treasuries was Bitcoin price went up $20,000. So again, did Michael Saylor just decide one day he was going to change his mind? No, again, it was a conversation. He had a conversation with Eric Weiss and he persuaded him of the value of Bitcoin. And then there was the famous anecdote that Eric Weiss tells so well when Michael Saylor rang him up and said, Eric, I've got 10,000. He says, what do you mean $10,000? He means, no, 10,000 Bitcoin. So what changes Bitcoin price? Conversations. So yes, I look at models and I find them interesting. And then I say, yeah, okay, how do you make them true? Not because someone drew a line on a piece of paper. I mean, before that, we had the top cat model. That's largely gone now. So models can either be proven right or wrong by our actions, but it comes down to our actions. It comes down to our conversations. And it's like, okay, we've had 3 conversations that had a really high impact on Bitcoin price in the last, 5 years? There's some other ones that had smaller impacts, but those are the big ones. Can we have more of those conversations?
Yeah.
What would that happen? What would happen if we had more of those conversations? What would happen if we're having these conversations on a more regular basis with the heads of not just nation states, that's happening already, but with pension funds, with sovereign funds, these people who are custodian between them of around $70 trillion of assets. And again, not going in there leading with why Bitcoin's great and how it's going to suck the monetary premium out of other assets and how wonderful it is as digital capital or digital credit, but going in there and making the first impulse not to speak but to listen and to understand who they are, how they make decisions, to talk to people who already work with these sovereign funds and pension funds, so that we're not going in suffering what I call blindfold archer syndrome, where we might have the most wonderful, eloquent messages. There are arrows in the world, but we don't know where the target is. And you can release 100 arrows and say 100 amazing things about Bitcoin, which are true, which are inspiring to the right person, and you can miss the target because the person you're talking to doesn't care a bean about any of them. They just care about what will my peers in the industry think if I adopt Bitcoin and they don't. And none of your arrows address that, so I cannot adopt Bitcoin. And how do you find out that that's what they care about? You listen. And that sounds simple, but that's where we need to go. That's why I say the next generation of leaders will not be extroverts, they'll be ambiverts. They'll spend the first part of the conversation listening, and only then are they going to open their mouths, and they're going to bring out the right arrow that's going to hit the bullseye based on what they've discovered about the person in front of them. Sounds simple, but that is not what we have been doing to date.
Yeah, it makes me think of I don't know if it's Jim Rohn or Bob Proctor, one of the personal development greats of just, it's what's simple to do is simple not to do, right? And like you said, it's easy. It's
Absolutely.
easy to do, but we just don't do it. Oh man,
100%. Well, the ego doesn't want to believe it's that simple, right? Because that kind of makes us feel stupid. Yeah. It's like, oh, that's so simple. How could I not have done that? I know that, but I didn't do it. To know and not to do is not to know. The ego wants to know that it's this big, complex super maneuver. And if I just bring out this new statistic about Bitcoin or this new study, and of course, all those things help, but not nearly as much as knowing what's the right thing to say. And we can find that out by shutting up and listening.
Again, it's funny, Daniel, because like this is what we were talking about, at the beginning of the mindset, the stories we tell ourselves, what you help people with one of your companies and what you're doing. And we talked about schooling and how as humans, I feel like we try to make things so complex. It's almost to like justify all the years of school we spent and all the things we were doing, when in reality, a lot of these things are so simple. It's listening. They're very simple answers. And we just kind of like run over them because it's like, well, it can't be that easy. Like there's no way it's that simple. Like it's truly remarkable.
The simple thing to do, the reason we often don't do it is that it requires more courage. And so it's like, you could have 7 things you want to do. Maybe you want to grow your podcast audience or whatever it is, or whatever your goal is. But if we don't get clear on asking ourselves the question, what's the highest impact action that I can take? Then we'll default to the one that is the easiest to complete, or the one that gives us the immediate endorphin hit through completing of it. And that is usually not the one that requires the most courage. So by asking what's going to be the needle moving activity, it brings us into our courage zone, not our comfort zone, because that may involve talking to some other person who might say no, who might reject it. Not us, but reject our ask. Although generally speaking, people don't. People actually want to help much more than we imagine. And that's been a huge part of, like a lot of the things we do in our coaching group, again, they're very similar. It's about, hey, this week you're going to ask someone for something that can move your project ahead. Sounds simple, but it's incredible how just that impulse and knowing that everyone's going to do the same, getting clear on, okay, what's the highest impact action you could take, and what's something someone can help you with, and what's something you've been holding out and asking, either because you might get an answer you don't want to hear, or because there's a little bit of fear and you're not quite sure whether you've got the right to ask them. But rather than rationalizing to yourself why you shouldn't ask them, recruit your intellect to ask yourself, how can I ask them, such that all the hesitations and reservations I have about appropriateness don't apply because I'm doing it from a mindset of service. Then we end up taking action. But it's a matter of a combination of commitment and recruiting our intellect to find a reason to take action, not a reason to not act. And that's why mindset's so important. Being smart by itself isn't enough. Some of the smartest people in the world are not necessarily the most wealthy, the most well-known, the most successful. And that's why, because if we're not using our intellect in a way which is supporting our growth, if we're using it to support our stagnation, then you can have the greatest intellect in the world. It's like having a very powerful engine, but your steering wheel, which is your mindset, is directing it towards a rock, and you're wondering why you're not moving ahead.
Wow, this is so profound. So we were talking about a few minutes ago, information asymmetry and things not being evenly distributed. And I would love for you to unpack, in saying that, I would love for you to unpack what you guys are doing with the methane, cleanup and what's happening there, and using Bitcoin mining to do that. Because again, this to me is really for years been one of the most profound things that is just, again, we go back to information asymmetry and people just not knowing. When people get their eyes on what's happening, I feel like the world just changes. I'm sure you do too, but it's just like, gosh, like when is this going to happen? So I'd love for you to unpack this a little bit.
35 landfills with Bitcoin mining operations on them takes the entire industry carbon negative. Not carbon neutral, carbon negative. Not achieved through some carbon credits or some carbon accounting or anything on paper, actually genuinely carbon negative at the layer of physics. In other words, it is responsible for the destruction of more emissions than the creation. So that's a big goal. And it doesn't sound that big, but actually it is big, because right now there's only like 1 or 2 landfills in the world that are doing it. And the landfills that it's been done on were flaring their emissions anyway. So the methane reduction was only 1/10. So we're targeting landfills that are currently venting their emissions. If you do it on flaring landfills, you've got to do 350 landfills. So we want to have 10 times the impact. So we're doing it on landfills that are currently venting. In other words, when you get decaying organic matter, which almost always happens, well, it always happens in landfills, could be from the building industry, from organic scraps, you name it. And it happens without the presence of air. You get these bacteria called methanotropes, and as the name suggests, the byproduct of them digesting that organic materials, they create methane. And what happens to that methane? Well, in many parts of the world, it just goes straight into the air. And it's one of the top 3 contributors to methane worldwide, anthropogenic methane. And we know from the United Nations reports that reducing methane is said to be the single strongest lever to reduce climate change in the next 25 years. So it's like, here we have this massive issue, methane reduction. We have one of the top 3 sources of it, and half the landfills in the world, we have no good way of doing anything with that methane, because they're in an area which is unregulated. There is not the financial incentive to do anything with it. They're too far away from the grid, or the grid would require too much of an upgrade, too expensive, so you can't just convert that gas into power and hook it up to the grid. It's really purely stranded energy. And there is no business in their right mind who'd want to set up a business in a landfill for obvious reasons. They're remote, bad interconnection, kind of smelly, except Bitcoin mining companies. Because of why? Because they're environmentally virtuous? No, they're no more environmentally virtuous or non-virtuous than any person in industry, but because of economic incentives that just happen to skew their behaviors in such a way that you are positively incentivized to hunt out the cheapest source of energy, because 80% of your operational budget is power. So that means that unlike any other industry, including a traditional data center, it makes economic sense to have the inconvenience, the remoteness, and the additional capital cost of procuring power from a landfill simply because of the very cheap electricity you'll get at the other end of it. So our mission is to find as many of these landfills as possible, find as much money as possible to pour into financing them, and to find as many Bitcoin mining companies as possible who want to do this. And then we're the marriage celebrant between the Bitcoin mining companies and the landfill owners. Sometimes they come to us with a landfill, and often we've found the landfill ourselves, and we introduce them to the landfill owner, and they form a deal. They have a power purchase agreement, and then we have a separate deal where we give the financing to the Bitcoin mining company. And why that's important is that a lot of these Bitcoin mining companies, they're not big Bitcoin mining companies. This isn't an economic model for a Riot or a Mara of this world, because it's only 5, 10, 20 megawatts at a time. It just doesn't suit the economic model of a big publicly listed mining company. But it does for a small one or a medium-sized one. But they're the ones who don't have access to capital markets, and so often they struggle to get infrastructure financing, particularly if it's at a small scale, and particularly if it's somewhere like a landfill. So we wanted to be that bridge. And particularly if it's Bitcoin mining, which it's a lot of infrastructure financing doesn't understand. We understand Bitcoin. We understand Bitcoin mining. We've invested the work to take the perceived risk off the table. And so we're comfortable with it. And so we can invest in it. And it tends to be a good arrangement for us and for the wholesale investors because these will generate carbon credits. So the wholesale investor into our fund wins because they get two sources of revenue, the loan capital interest repayments, but also the carbon credits. So they get a better return than they would through traditional private equity. Plus, it's an uncorrelated source, which they're always looking for, interest plus carbon credits. The Bitcoin mining company does well because they get very cheap cost of power. And whilst there's a higher capex cost to start with, it positions them very sweetly for the next two halving cycles. So it's the ultimate low time preference way to mine, where you're really looking to the future and your future economic sustainability. And it works well for the landfill owner because they get the sweetest deal of all, arguably, because their equation is, hey, would you like to pay no money and have an environmental hazard turned into a source of money for you that's going to pay you millions of dollars over the next 10 years? And other than about 10 hours of one worker's work on site every week to tweak some valves on the landfill to optimize the gas flow, which is in your economic advantage anyway, plus the cognitive overhead of working your way through a contract and signing a deal and then providing a small land footprint on an area where land doesn't cost too much and you have a lot of land, there's nothing else they have to do. So it's really an equation that works very well for all parties involved. And so now our mission is just to scale. We've found the capital, we've found some of the landfills, and now we're actively looking for the mining companies who want to do these operations. And then we'll just see where the bottlenecks is. I don't know where it'll be. It doesn't seem to be the capital. People seem to be very interested in this. It seems to be finding the sites and finding the mining companies that was more challenging, but we're starting to solve that problem now.
Do you think the last person in Bitcoin, like, because we've talked about the confirmation bias and why people don't get in and just that mindset, right? And so I've had this thought for a while that even the last person in Bitcoin will still stand to benefit, even if you're the very last person to adopt Bitcoin, because theoretically, at least, society should be getting cleaned up around you. Civil unrest going down, standard of living going up, the cleaning up the environment, all these things. So even the very last person on the network should stand to benefit from a Bitcoin standard becoming the norm in society, should they not?
Well, the benefits won't be so much the opportunity to benefit from price appreciation by that point. It will be, as you say, it'll be more the benefit because the people who went previously built something which now they can take advantage of, just like the people who built the internet. Mean that we can take advantage of what we're doing now. We don't have to be physically co-located because some people created the protocols and then the application layer that all this just kind of works seamlessly. So they'll absolutely benefit. They'll take it for granted completely. And they probably will never know how much the early pioneers had to fight in the early days and struggle to make the self-evident get to the point where suddenly others could adopt it.
Well, that makes sense. I wanted to ask you that for a while because, again, I can't ask that to everybody. So what is the Bitcoin end game in your eyes? Jeff Booth is famous for saying, Bitcoin has to account for, and this is, segueing off of what we just talked about, it has to account for all 900 trillion or 1 quadrillion assets in the whole world. It is money. It's the new protocol. Everything's going to be sucked onto. Like, where do you see it? It could be 1,000 years from now or 10 years from now. I don't care about the time frame, but what do you think is the total addressable market for Bitcoin at the end of the day in your mind?
That sounds accurate. I mean, I've seen the predictions. I've seen the total amount of monetary premium that's associated with these different asset classes. So if you want to draw your little picture of your total addressable market, then from a store of value point of view, it is probably not the full 900 trillion, but at least the portion of that, which is the monetary premium of those assets, because some is the value of actually the house itself, for example, of its real estate, or the industrial value of the gold. But the monetary premium on top of that, certainly, and that's maybe half of that, at least half of that 900 trillion.
Yeah, I know Jack Mullers is always saying it's 1/2 of every trade. So it's 450 trillion, kind of to your point of it, just like it's being that monetary premium aspect. So, and then the last one I really have for you is there anything we talked a lot about a lot of optimism and just everything you're doing with and it's so profound and so amazing. But is there anything that scares you in Bitcoin? Is there anything that concerns you, or maybe you can take it a positive way of like, hey, we didn't talk about this, and this is really has me hopeful, I guess. So maybe take it either way with maybe any last thoughts there.
There's certainly things that surprise me sometimes, and often we talked about mindset to start with, and I'll use an example. So how do we respond to the quantum attack vector? Well, we could say, oh, it's terrible, we've got to do something now, and that would freak everyone out. It would create a lot of urgency, but it would also probably crash markets in the meantime. So we don't want to do that. And nor is it required, because we do have time on our side, for now at least. But then do we want to say, oh, it's no problem, people are exaggerating, it's going to affect every other industry, we've got years to sort that out? Actually, in some ways, that's a scarier response, because that can lead people to think, oh, these Bitcoiners are being complacent, they're not taking it seriously. So there's a measured path, and I think people like Hunter Beast have been very good at exemplifying that middle path, where he'll look at it, and he'll be honest and he'll say, you know what, there are some risks. They're not imminent. Bitcoin will face issues that are the same as the banking sector. And we do have some additional challenges, because we have to go through a consensus process to make them out, to do them, which is why it's important we start now. And we do have issues to address about what we do with lost coins, for example, right? And there are decisions to be made, and those won't necessarily be palatable to everyone. So, for example, what do you do with Satoshi's wallet? In a world where quantum exists, at some point, that public key can be de-encrypted when you have a crypto-resistant quantum computer, right? So what do? Do you just say, okay, well, that's just going to be what happens? Or do you give a long time frame and say at some point those will be destroyed? And as Thomas Sowell once said, there's no solutions, there's only trade-offs. I don't think that's always true, but it is true in this case. There's a trade-off. If you do nothing and you maximize for property rights and immutability, then you minimize for the impact on Bitcoin price. But if you do the opposite, if you maximize for what's going to be best for Bitcoin price, you have to make some decisions which may be perceived as some, with cause, as disrupting immutability and censorship resistance and property rights. So there are some difficult decisions to be made, and there is a potential for that to be divisive. And so the best thing we can do is to learn from what's happened in the past, seeing the issues that have divided the community, and this is going to be hard, but think about the principle not of, I would say, think about the consequence of your actions and your communications, because the divisiveness that this could cause is something we should be mindful of. So I see it as a challenge. It's not something that scares me, but it's like, yeah, this is a challenge. It'll be interesting to see how it resolves itself. I'm confident we will find the answer. How will that happen, and over what time frame and with what consequence? Don't know yet. I'm confident we have the right people who are looking at it and who are treating it seriously. And also, I don't trivialize it. There are some challenges that we have to navigate our way through. And the challenges, in my mind, is not so much the imminent threat of quantum computing, but the threat is its perceptions, right? The threat really is the market's perception that the Bitcoin community is not giving them a clear path forward towards its resolution. That's the risk. So that's what we have to be mindful of.
Such is life, right? Perception. All of life, right? Stories, mindset, everything, just a perfect bow on this amazing, profound talk. Thank you so much, Daniel. Where can people find you and connect with your businesses?
Well, they can find me on DS Batten on X. And if you want to do Bitcoin mining on a landfill, or a landfill owner, you can connect to me, or you want to invest in the future of decentralizing the Bitcoin network and taking it carbon negative, then ch4capital.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Daniel. This is, again, a profound talk. Thank you so much. I'm honored to have you. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
If you like that episode, then you're going to love the playlist we put together for you with our most recent podcast with the top Bitcoiners, sound money, liberty advocates in the world. Go check those out here. We'll see you inside. You're going to love them.